Hi everyone, my name is Francesca Lazzari, and today I'm here with Dimitri to present our session on how machine learning and AI can support the fight against COVID-19. Dimitri is my co-speaker, and he joined Microsoft 15 years ago as a technical evangelist. He then worked for some years as an AI and machine learning software engineer, doing pilot projects with large companies in Europe. Now he combines his work as a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft with also being an associate professor at the Moscow Institute for Physics and Technology. He lives in Moscow, Russia, and in addition to technology, he loves his daughter, Vicky, and he does a lot of great experiments in using AI for science art.
Thank you, Francesca. Francesca is originally from Italy. She lives in Boston, Massachusetts. She loves data and long walks with her 6-month-old daughter. She is adjunct professor of AI and machine learning at Columbia University. And at Microsoft, she is developer advocate manager, coordinating our team of advocates working on AI and ML. Before joining Microsoft, she was a research fellow at Harvard in the Department of Technology and Operations.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. So this project is actually a very, very important project for us because we noticed that one of the major challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic has been finding effective treatments for the virus. So this was actually our problem that we noticed last year and this year as well. The rapid spread of coronavirus generated an urgent need for comprehensive therapies in the scientific community. And as a consequence, we noticed that the medical research community experienced an acceleration in new coronavirus literature, making it very difficult for scientists to keep up. So just to give you an idea, around 30,000 scientific papers related to COVID are published every month. So you can understand that this is a very, very big amount of scientific paper and literature in general that scientists need to read. So in this specific session, we will show you how you can leverage the core dataset. This is a dataset that is containing more than 400,000 scientific papers on COVID, and also how you can leverage different advances in natural language processing, NLP, and other artificial intelligence technique in order to generate new insights in order to support the ongoing fight against COVID. This COVID-19 dataset is a very good dataset to start with because it represents the most extensive machine readable coronavirus literature. And in the same dataset, there are about 200,000 articles with full text. We also put in this slide the links so that you can also access the dataset by yourself. You can understand that this allows the worldwide AI and I would say also machine learning community and scientific community in general with the opportunity to apply text and data mining approaches to connect different insights across these very good content. So what we decided to do is we started thinking about different natural language processing techniques that we can use in order to analyze and extract knowledge from this data set. NLP is focused on the interactions between computers and human language, and most importantly, this technique tries to understand how to program computers to process and analyze large amounts of natural language data. NLP is behind the following applications. We just put some of them here in this slide, such as intent classification, name entity recognition, keyword extraction, text summarization, question answering, and many others. And also there is the other part that is about the statistical models that you can leverage in order to do similar type of research. And these include the development of probabilistic models that can predict the next word in a sequence, given the words that preceded. And a number of statistical language models are in use already, such as recurrent neural networks, transformer, also Bert, GPT-2, also the Microsoft Turing NLG. And if you want to learn more about NLP with PyTorch, you can also check out our GitHub repo that is Introduction to NLP with PyTorch. And also there is a Microsoft Learning path around NLP with PyTorch. So our idea, the first idea was to use Bert. Bert, probably you're already familiar with this. Bert makes use of transformer. That is an attention mechanism that learns contextual relations between words in a text. So in its very vanilla form, I would say, simplified form, transformer includes two separate mechanisms, an encoder that reads the text input and a decoder that produces a prediction for the task itself. Most of the time, as a data scientist, we like to say that this type of model is opposed to directional models, which read the text input in a sequential way, so left to right or right to left. And the transformer encoder actually reads the entire sequence of the words at once. And these characteristics allows the model to learn the context of the word based on all its surrounding context and information, so left and right of the word. And before feeding the word sequence into Bert, part of the words in each sequence are replaced with a mask token, and the model then attempts to predict the original value of the mask words based on the context provided by the other non-mask words in that same sequence. What is nice of Bert is that it contains 345 million parameters. But at the same time, these also represent a challenge. So it is very difficult to train from scratch. In most of the cases, as we wrote here, it makes sense to use a pre-trained language model. So this is the main idea that is also behind this project. We want to extract as much semi-structured information from a text as possible, and then we want to store it into a NoSQL database in order to eventually processing it also at a later time. Storing information in database would allow us also to make some very specific queries to answer some of the questions, as well as to provide visual exploration tool for medical experts for structural research, and also in order to generate additional insights. So this is, as you can see from this slide, this is the overall architecture of the proposed system. And we will also use different Azure technologies to gain insights into this paper corpus. And we will see some of them later, such as text analytics for health, Cosmos DB, and also Power BI. First of all, in order to give you like a general overview of the approach that we use. So we started with the idea of extracting entities and relations. In terms of the data set, we have the Kaggle data set, that is again a Medical NER data set, and also we could leverage what we call the generic BC5 CDR data set. And in terms of a base language model, here we have a few options. We can use a generic BERT model. We can also pre-training BERT on medical text, and finally we can use the PubMedBERT pre-trained model by Microsoft Research. I want also to show you a snapshot of the data that we use for this project. So in general, this is a very nice snapshot that you can get a nice overview of the type of data that we use. In general, the data set consists of many different parts. There is a metadata file that contains the most important information for all publications in one place. These type of information are, for example, the title of the publication, the journal, the authors, the abstract, also the data, the date of the publication. Then there is also an additional part of the dataset that is about full text papers. These are in a directory that is called document parsers that contain a structured text in a JSON format. And then we have also a pre-built document embedded that maps cord UIDs to float vectors that reflect some overall semantics of the paper itself. With this type of data, what we did next is using what we call the NER. NER stands for Name Entity Recognition, and we can use these in order to extract name entities from text and also determine their type. In this specific case, the token classification model supports NER, Name Entity Recognition, and also other token level classification tasks in general. But in general, NER is the task of detecting and classifying key informations that are also called entities in a specific text. So in other words, a NER model takes a piece of text as input, and for each word in the text, the model identifies a category that the word belongs to. Also, as I was mentioning before, in order to make some insights from the text, we not only decided to use NER, even if it's the best techniques that probably was available for us to use, but if we wanted to, if we can understand specific entities that are present in the text, we can also perform semantically rich search in the text itself that answers specific questions. And also we can try to obtain data on co-occurrence of different entities. So in order to train and learn a model, we need a much larger data set. And this is a very common problem for data scientists. And as you can understand, most of the time, finding those data sets is a very, very challenging task. So the good news, as you can see also from this slide and from this architecture, is that there is a technique that is called the transformer language models that can be trained in a semi-supervised manner using what we call the transfer learning. So first, the base language model, in this example is Bert, is trained on a large corpus of text. And then after that, we can specify it to a specific task, such as, for example, classification or NER on a smaller data set. Again, this is called a transfer process, and we can actually extend this process of a further step. This is this additional step that is the training of a generic pre-trained model on a domain-specific data set. For example, in this project, we decided to use the area of medical science. Microsoft Research has this pre-trained model that is called PubMedBERT, and using text from the PubMed repository. So we decided again to extend this of a further step, and so we decided to use this PubMedBERT technology also. And this model can be further adopted to different specific tasks that can be again related to specialized data sets that are eventually available. As you can see, this is what we use and how we use also the PubMedBERT technology from Microsoft Research. And we decide also to run all these on Azure Machine Learning. So Azure Machine Learning is the technology that we use in order to run all these models also in parallel. So for this exercise, we use Azure Machine Learning, and I don't know if you're already familiar with this, but in general, Azure Machine Learning is a cloud-based environment that you can use to train, deploy, automate, manage, and also track all your machine learning models. Azure Machine Learning can be used for, I would say, any kind of machine learning applications, from classical machine learning to also deep learning, supervised and unsupervised learning. And you can also write in Python. This is what we use also for this project, but also R. And you can most of the time use what we call the Azure ML SDK for Python. And you can again build your model from scratch using just Python. What is nice of Azure Machine Learning is that provides all the tools that developers and data scientists need for their machine learning workflows, including the Azure Machine Learning Designer. This is just in drag and drop modules, but also Jupyter notebooks that are probably the most used notebooks for data science and machine learning. And again, you can just leverage the Azure Machine Learning SDK for Python in order to get started with Azure Machine Learning, with machine learning on the cloud. Finally, there is also something that in my opinion, it's great for data scientists, is that there is this machine learning CLI, that is an Azure CLI extension that provides commands for managing all the different resources in Azure Machine Learning Studio. So Azure Machine Learning Studio and the workspace that you can create on Studio is also a very nice environment that you can leverage as a data scientist in order to have all your resources there that you need to build your end-to-end machine learning solution, and also to share your solutions with other data scientists and other co-workers. So I will let Dimitri show you a little bit more how we actually get started with this project and what we did in more detail.
Okay, let me show you how Azure Machine Learning looks for a developer. The main thing in Azure Machine Learning is the workspace, which contains everything, including your data, your computing resources, notebooks, and so on. So once you create the Azure Machine Learning workspace in Azure portal, you end up in this Azure Machine Learning Studio, where you have all those resources available to you on the left. For example, you can see the computing resources. I have, for example, GPU and CPU computes that I can use to run notebooks. I also have defined 2 compute clusters, which I can use for larger scale training, multi-node training. So to begin training the NER model, I will use Jupyter Notebooks. So I will go to the Notebooks section. And here I have the notebook for PubMedBERT training. So I will just briefly show you the mechanics of how it works. We start with existing PubMedBERT model. So we can load it directly using Transformers library. Luckily, this PubMedBERT model is published on the official Transformers site. So we don't need to look for a place where to download it. We just need to know the name, and we can automatically instantiate the model, and we can instantiate the tokenizer, which is used to build to break up the text into separate tokens. Then we load the dataset. For the dataset, we used BC5 CDR dataset, which contains a large number of entities from PubMed. But unfortunately, it's not recent enough, but it was our first starting point. The dataset looks like this. And then we need to do some data processing to end up with token representation. So we can see that there are 2 token types in this dataset, chemicals and diseases. We need to convert the dataset to so-called BIO encoding, which maps every token to the entity class, and also specifies whether it's a beginning of entity or inside, like inner part of entity, or other token. O stands for other token. So there would be essentially 5 token classes, and our model would be a token classification model with 5 classes. So we then create this data set in PyTorch and do the training. We instantiate Bert for token classification model. We specify the number of classes. And then we essentially need to train the top part, the top classifier on top of Bert model. And you can see after doing it, we can run this in the notebook. I will not show it just for the sake of time. And we will end up with a model that can take an abstract, a piece of text, and it will produce the list of token IDs. So it will extract entities like hydroxychloroquine, HCQ, which is the same hydroxychloroquine, but short form, and so on. You can see that the model somehow works, but it cannot extract some recent diseases like, for example, COVID-19. Well, to train this model in the notebook is not the best idea because it takes quite some time to train. So the better way to use Azure Machine Learning is to schedule this training as an experiment. So let me switch to slides and show you how this works. To schedule this training to be run as the Azure Machine Learning experiment, we need to define several entities. First of all, we need to define the data set. To do that, we can use a YAML file, this BC5 CDR YAML, and then we can use Azure CLI commands to upload this into the Azure Machine Learning workspace. So we just say azml data create and specify this YAML file. What this does is uploads the data to the Azure Machine Learning workspace storage and defines the data set on top of it, which we can then use for our experiments. Second, we need to define the environment in which the experiment will run. And defining the environment normally means building a container around it with all required libraries. Azure Machine Learning can do it for us. We just need to define what we need in our environment. In this case, we can start with the Docker image, with the standard Docker image for Microsoft Azure ML, which supports GPU. And then we specify in the conda YAML file, which lists all the libraries, all the versions that we need for our script to run. Once we have defined those two files, we can say azml environment create, and this will create the environment for us. When we want to train later on the cluster, it would take this container, apply necessary changes, and run this environment on the cluster. Finally, to do the actual training, we need to describe the experiment. Experiment means that essentially we want to run a certain script on the cluster. So here we will specify the input data set. And this is the data set that we have created previously, BC5CDR. We will specify the compute target on where this experiment will run. In this case, I will use one of the clusters that I have shown you previously in the beginning, the one that supports GPU, because that's essential for transformers. And I will specify the code to run, the command to run, Python train py, and as the parameter data, I will pass input corpus, which will convert automatically the path to the data set to the local path in Python. So in Python, when I want to do training, I will just access this data as a normal directory. Once I have done that, if needed, I can create the compute cluster also from a command line. In my case, I have done it previously through Azure Portal. And then you just submit the job. And once you submit the job, it starts running on the portal. Let me first show you the data set that I have created. It is available here in the portal as well, BC5CDR, and I can actually click and explore the data set from here. I can get the code that I can use from Python to get access to this data set. I can also have a look at the data set here. So if I want, I can define the data set by uploading the file directly here on the portal and not from a command line. And then the experiment. The experiment that I have submitted, it was called NER train. I can see it here in the experiments section. And here are all the different runs of the experiment. You can see I have a lot of failed runs. When I was setting up this demo, I had some, of course, misconfigurations and some problems, but then two final experiments, they run for 2 hours and for 3 hours. And that is how long the NER training took on the GPU cluster. So I can go into the experiment, and I have associated data with that experiment. In the outputs plus logs, for example, I can see all the textual output that my experiment produced. So whenever I print something in my training script to console, this will be captured here. So I can see how my training took place, like everything that was printed, and the fact that it's finished successfully. All other text files, they can show how the preparation took place, like how the environment was created and so on. So if I run into some problems, I can get very detailed explanation here. And what's interesting, the experiment captures the output directory from my compute. So if I place something in the directory, it would be captured in outputs. So in my case, after the training the model, I will save the result into outputs. And here it is, PubMedNER. This is the final trained model. Also, I have captured here all the checkpoints, but that is something I probably would not need. I need the final model to use it. So once I have done this training, I want probably to get this model out of Azure ML. And that is how I am able to do it. So I can get the data associated with any experiment by providing its ID in the Azure ML job download command. And this will download the output directory to my local machine. So I can easily fetch the trained model, and I can use it like anywhere else. So in my case, here is the example how this model performed on one of the abstracts from our core data set. And you can see that it recognizes correctly some diseases, some chemicals, but for example, COVID-19 is not recognized because the data set that we used is rather old. Unfortunately, that's the best we can do with existing data set. Also, to do some better entity extraction, we need some other entity types, like, for example, different biological fluids or different ways of treatment. It would be nice to be able to extract those, and also to extract some common entities such as quantities, temperatures, and so on, which can be helpful in analyzing papers.
Okay, thank you for these wonderful demos. Dimitri mentioned that we are going also to use some additional tools in order to make sure that our project is going to be successful for the scientific community. And one of these additional tools that we were thinking about using and that we actually ended up using is text analytics for health. Text analytics for health is a cognitive services that exposes a pre-trained PubMedBERT model with some additional capabilities. It is important to mention here that text analytics for health is a preview capability that is provided by Microsoft as is, so with all defaults. So as a consequence, it's important that you use the text analytics for health for your solutions, for your projects, but it should not be implemented or deployed in any production environment and in any production use. Text analytics for health is also very interesting because it provides a feature of the text analytics API. So it's actually a feature itself of the text analytics API service that is able to extract and label different relevant medical information from unstructured text, such as, for example, doctor notes or discharge summaries or any different types of clinical documents. It can be used through a web API or container service supports, such as name entity recognition, as you can see, and also relation extraction. So these are all the different techniques that is actually supporting, and also entity linking, that is more like ontology mapping, and negation detection. What is nice is that, and I also mentioned this in this slide, is that it supports also what we call the name entity extraction, as you can see from this slide. This means that it detects words and phrases mentioning in unstructured text that can be associated with one or more semantic types, such as diagnosis or medication name, also symptoms, age, sign in general. The other important aspect is about relation extraction. Relation extraction is very important because it identifies meaningful connections between concepts that are mentioned in the text itself. For example, there is a time of condition that is a relation that is found by associating a condition name with a time or between an abbreviation and the full description. So as you can understand, this is another capabilities that is very, very helpful for doctors and for the scientific community in general. So both the name entity extraction and the relation extraction are two capabilities that are supported.
Actually, it is very good news that text analytics for health is available, because when you're using text analytics for health, you don't need to concentrate on how you deploy your model. It is being deployed automatically. It is scaled, it supports scaling. So very convenient to use this model for our tasks. And to use it, we can either query it using REST API, or we can use Text Analytics SDK, which is the Python SDK, which supports working with text analytics. To install it, we can just use pip install, and we need to specify a very specific version of the SDK, the beta version, which supports text analytics for health. And then calling it actually very simple. You instantiate the client object, where you specify the API version, which also needs to be a preview version, which supports the text analytics for health. And then to call it, you just pass in the document and do one function call. Now, what you can pass either one document or a collection of up to 10 documents to be processed in one query. So, for example, if we take this phrase, I have not been administered any aspirin, just 300 milligrams of favipiravir daily, just the phrase that contains a lot of medical terms, we will get something like this in return. It will be like healthcare entities, where for each entity we get the text itself, then the category, what kind of entity it is, the position inside the text, confidence, and all the related entities and linking to ontologies. Linking to ontologies is very convenient because the same concept, like for example, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus, well, coronavirus is not exactly the same entity, but SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 are two different names for the same entity, and the service is able to map it to the same ontology ID automatically. Also, in terms of relations, you can see that here in this text, 300 milligrams is the dosage of favipiravir, and that is extracted by the service as well. So you can imagine that if we have scientific papers mentioning different treatments for COVID-19, we would be able to automatically query like what are the dosages of medications mentioned in the text. That is, in fact, our goal. So now, what do we need to do if we want to analyze all abstracts from core dataset using text analytics for health? As we mentioned earlier, there are 400,000 papers. What we did, we split them into chunks of 500 papers each, so that we can like start processing and we don't have to wait for processing to end, and we can start analyzing and playing with the data. And those chunks of 500 papers we stored as JSON files containing title, abstract, and so on. And then we need to essentially take this JSON file and enrich it with the entities and relations. So we don't want to wait for a long time for this processing to happen, because if we just run it on one machine, it would take something like 11, 12 hours. So what we wanted to do, we want to be able to do this in parallel using a cluster of computers. And for that, we can also use Azure Machine Learning. Azure Machine Learning originally supports clusters to do distributed training or hyperparameter optimization, when you can run different experiments with different parameters on different machines in the cluster. But we can also use it for jobs like this, for parallel sweep jobs. In fact, there is the specific type of job in Azure ML called the sweep job. And the idea is that we will have several machines in the cluster running in parallel. They would be fetching data from the same data set, and then storing it somewhere like in the common place for output. To do this job, we define this cognitive sweep job, parallel sweep job. The type is sweep job. And the idea of sweep job is that we can specify hyperparameters, which would be sampled from different distributions. So in this case, we would have one hyperparameter called number, and it would be sampled from either 0 or 1. So in this case, in the simple case, I will just run 2 nodes in the cluster. And so essentially, I would start 2 instances of the script in parallel. And each instance would run the file called process.py, giving it a number of nodes, 2, the number, which is the search space parameter, which would be either 0 or 1 for different tasks. And I would also provide the input dataset path. And I will define the input dataset here as well. The processing script itself would be pretty simple. I would just need to read the original dataset as the normal file, for example, using pandas. And then I will go through each rows, and if the number of node would be like the remainder when divided by number of nodes would correspond to the number of nodes, I would process this record. So that's pretty simple code. And let me show you how the dataset, how those experiments look in Azure Machine Learning. So if I go again to experiments here, here is my cognitive sweep experiment. And I have several runs again. And each run here, it is the sweep job run. So it contains 2 child runs, which are listed here. You can see they have different IDs and a different combination of parameters. So one goes with number 0, another with number 1. And if I go to child runs, I can actually view all those runs independently. I can select, for example, this one and see what the output was and what the parameters were. So here is my script that did the data processing. So as a result of this parallel processing, we would end up with a bunch of JSON documents which look like this. So for each paper, we would have ID, title, authors, and then the collection of entities and collection of relations. And you can see that this data is clearly a semi-structured data, which is very good to be stored in the NoSQL type of databases, because it is inherently hierarchical. So we have a collection of papers, each paper has a collection of entities, and then entities are related between each other. So to store those in Azure, the best solution would be to use a NoSQL database called Cosmos DB.
So let me introduce a little bit Cosmos DB and why we decided to use it. So Azure Cosmos DB is a globally distributed multi-model database that supports the document, graph, and key value data models. Azure Cosmos DB does not require any schema, which is great, or secondary indexes in order to support querying over a document in a collection. And this was another feature, another capability that was very, very helpful for us. By default, documents are automatically indexed in a consistent manner, and these make a document queryable as soon as it is created, which, as you can understand, is another great capability to have. In general, the process that is followed is the following. So documents are stored within collections, then a document can contain one or more attachments, and finally the user can access these documents and can these be managed via different permissions. So it's also great from a different collaboration point of view.
Okay, so the whole idea of using Cosmos DB for storing this data is to be able to query this data using SQL queries. Of course, once we end up with JSON files, we could write Python scripts in order to transform the data in any way we like, but that is more complex than just writing a SQL query. For example, consider the idea above that we want to see which papers mention which medications and in which dosages. To do that, we can just write one query like this. We want to select the title of paper, joining relations such that relation is dosage of medication, and the target of this relation, which is the medicine, would be hydroxychloroquine, for example. It would contain this word hydro. And this query would just give us the result, which is very useful for a researcher, because he would then be able to go to those papers and study them in more detail. Let me show you how this query can be executed in Azure portal. So to show you the Cosmos DB database, I would need to switch from my Azure Machine Learning Studio to Azure portal. And here is my Cosmos DB database in the Azure portal. And it contains built-in Data Explorer, which is a very useful way to look at the data and do all kinds of data manipulation right here in the portal. You can see that in my database, I have the court database, and it has a couple of collections. One of them is called papers. And in papers, you can select items. And here are all the processed papers, almost 400,000 of them. And each paper is a JSON document. So we can select it and have a look at this document. It contains abstract, titles, publishing time, and then the list of entities and relations. To query those, we can select a new SQL query. And we can say, for example, select star from papers P, which would give us essentially the list of all papers, which is probably not the most interesting thing. But it's nice to make sure that it works. Yeah, we have the JSON result. Now, to come back to our example with medications and dosages, here is the query that I have shown you previously on the slide, selecting title of paper and dosages of related medications. We can execute it. And we can see in a second the result in the JSON format. Here is the list of all papers and medications with the corresponding dosages. That looks pretty good, but normally we don't want just this result. We want to like analyze the data somehow. And to analyze the data, we typically use Python, because Python contains a lot of rich like functions for manipulating data. Luckily, we can use Python here in Cosmos DB as well, because Cosmos DB contains related notebooks. And those notebooks are almost like traditional Jupyter notebooks, but they contain some additional extensions. So for example, here, what I can do, I can run the SQL query right here inside the cell. And this SQL query is can output the result in the table in the document, but it can also output to any pandas data frame. So what I do here in this query, I say I want to query my database, and I want to output everything into pandas data frame called meds. And what I select here is the paper itself, title, publishing time, and so on, and also the medication, and also the ontology ID related to that medication, because I want to study unique medications with regardless of the term that which was used to mention them. So after running this query, what I get this table. So I have medications on the right, the UML ID. And also all the papers and publishing times. Why this is good? Well, I can produce some interesting insights from this data. Well, this is the very simple insight. For example, I can see how many entities were mentioned in different time periods. You can see that publication activities started in March last year, and then it kind of was increasing since then. And that is the time we're analyzing the data. So that's why it drops, because we just analyze it for half a month. Then what I can do, I can come up with the table of most frequently mentioned medications and also join them by using ontology ID. And you can see that the most frequently mentioned medication is hydroxychloroquine, which is like the oldest way of COVID treatment, then chloroquine and so on. And we can also count the number of negative mentions to see how negative this medicine is, which is probably not the very good estimate for how good or bad this medicine is, but just in case it can give some indication of the context. Finally, what I do here, I come up with the top 15, I think, used medications, and for them we do some further processing. We group that by month, and we calculate the number of positive and negative mentions each month. So this gives us, in the end, a nice graph like this, which reflects different ways of COVID treatment. So, for example, you can see that hydroxychloroquine, which is the popular medicine, it was very mentioned, very discussed in the beginning, and then this graph drops. Even though the number of publication increases, still this is not a percentage, this is the absolute number. So if we also divide by the number of publications, we'll probably see even steeper drop in hydroxychloroquine. While other treatments like, for example, remdesivir and favipiravir, they become more and more discussed, so they become kind of more popular. So those graphs, they allow us to extract how the treatment of the disease changes over time, which is, I think, is a very useful insight. So to summarize, we have used Jupyter notebooks in Cosmos DB, and they were really useful because we could run SQL query and transform it into pandas data frame. So this is the good strategy. Once we end up with semi-structured data, we then can use SQL query to create the structured table out of that, and then process the structured table using pandas. And a lot of processing takes place on the database side. We don't have to worry about that. So to show you some final results of what we managed to achieve, this is the graph that I have already demonstrated, which shows the changes in COVID treatment over time. Then we can also plot things like relations between different terms. So for example, here we take diseases on the right and different treatment strategies on the left. So strategies like prevention, using drugs, using oxygen, using placebo, for example, or mechanical ventilation. And we can see how often different means of treatment are discussed. And we can see that a lot of papers are indeed focused on preventing the disease. Like prevention and masks are among most popular topics. And then there is also mechanical ventilation and supplemental oxygen. So yeah, and we can also see that this is the same for other terms like infection. In the infection, the most frequently discussed things is also prevention. So it would be interesting, of course, to also see how this changes over time, but that can be easily demonstrated as well. We just showed the overall number of mentions. Also, we can mention, we can calculate number of mentions of diseases and different medicines. So here, COVID-19, of course, is the most frequently discussed disease because core data set is focused on COVID-19. And we can see that hydroxychloroquine is like the most popular one, lopinavir, and so on. And Quarantine also, for some reason, is categorized as different medicine. Finally, it would be also interesting to find co-occurrence of terms. So, for example, we can, if you take the term medicine, we can see which medical combinations occur often with each other. And this is the diagram on the left. You can see that, for example, hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, which is a popular combination, which is a well-known combination, is indeed visible from this diagram. And on the right, we can see which treatments go well together. Oxygen and ventilation quite naturally. So I think those insights are quite interesting, but if we do some realistic medical studies, we need to do some more deep understanding of text. And we ideally want to give the ability to query this semantic information also to some medical researchers, not only to data scientists like us who can produce those graphs and SQL queries. And in order to do that, we can use interactive visualization tool called Power BI.
I totally agree. Data visualization is probably one of the most important techniques that the data scientists, but also developers have in order to not only understand what are the results of their models and their algorithms, but also to understand how they can extrapolate additional insights from either the data sources that they are using and also the results that are producing. So that's why we decided to use Power BI just as the end of this end-to-end solution. And Power BI, it's great, again, both for business experts, scientists, data scientists, developers who wants to create some nice visualization around the data and the different data sources that they are using for their projects. Just in simple terms, Power BI is a collection of software services, application as well, and also connectors that work together in the different pieces in order to turn your unrelated also sources of data into interactive and meaningful insights. There are many different ways to leverage Power BI's capabilities and also many different data sources that you can use in order to visualize your data. Your data may be in an Excel spreadsheet or in a collection of cloud-based data warehouses, for example. Power BI's can access all these different data sources, and you can start visualizing some of them. Power BI is also based on different components, as I was mentioning earlier. These components all work together in a very nice way, and they start with three basic components. This is what we call a Windows desktop application that is called the Power BI Desktop. Then there is an online SaaS, so software as a service. This is a service that is called the Power BI service. And then we have also the Power BI mobile apps for different devices. So these three elements, Power BI Desktop, the service, and the mobile apps, are designed to let you create, share, and consume different scientific and business insights in the way that you can leverage those and also communicate, share those with others, and in this case with the scientific community.
So let me show you the dashboard that we have created in Power BI Desktop to access our collection of data. As Francesca mentioned, Power BI Desktop can be used to connect to different types of data. So here we can connect from Power BI Desktop directly to Cosmos DB by selecting it here. So what we have done, we connected to Cosmos DB and typed in the SQL queries above to get the list of entities and relations. So here on the first tab, we can see the list of entities. On the left, we can see entity types. And on the right, the actual entities. So for example, if I go with medication name, you can see the number this entity appears in text. And on the right, when I select this medication name, automatically the right table is filtered by this type, and I can see all medications. So here, hydroxychloroquine and HCQ are the top two most popular ones, and those are the same concept because you can see they have the same ontology ID. So this is the easy way for a medical professional to explore this database, because ideally you can also build the list of papers where this is mentioned on the right and those kind of things. If I want to do the query with dosages of medication that we have considered before, I can switch to Relations tab. And Relations is pretty much the same. I can say dosage of medication here, and I get the table of the right with all different dosages and medication names. Then I can filter on medication name or sort on medication name. And that is a nice way for me to explore the dataset. This concludes our presentation, and I think the main takeaway that we want you to have out of this talk is that the text mining for medical texts is really a very valuable resource to gain insights from large corpus of text, and it can speed up the medical research a lot. We have shown the conceptual demo how this can be done, but to apply it to different areas of science, you would need to train your own entity recognizer, because for medicine we have used cognitive service, but for other areas there might not be existing trained models. And the process that we have shown in the beginning, how to train the model on Azure ML, can actually be really useful. Also, we have used a lot of technologies in Microsoft Azure during this demonstration. We have shown you how to use Azure ML to train models individually, and how to use parallel sweep job to run the series of tasks on the cluster. We have discussed and shown you the text analytics for health to do name entity recognition and ontology mapping. We have used Cosmos DB to store and query semi-structured data, and then Power BI to explore this data interactively. And finally, Jupyter Notebooks to do more detailed data analysis. And this stack of technologies is really can really be very well used together to produce this final result of being able to analyze medical texts and gain insights. Some more information about different technologies that we have used, you can find in different resources that are shown on this slide. Most of the process that we have discussed is also covered in the blog post above, which shows also some code samples. And then you can see links to text analytics for health, to Cosmos DB, to all individual components of Microsoft Azure that we have discussed. And also you can learn in more detail about almost any Microsoft technology at the resource called Microsoft Learn, which contains indeed a lot of nice courses. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any further questions, ideas, or feedback, we would be really glad to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.